The shipping container smelled like rust and fear. Kang stood at the edge of the dock, his black coat whipping in the cold Seoul wind, his eyes scanning the row of containers that his men had just intercepted from a cargo ship that was never supposed to stop at this port. The night was thick with fog rolling off the Han River, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the quiet shuffle of his men positioning themselves around the perimeter. Did not come to these things personally anymore. He had people for this. He had people for everything. But tonight something had pulled at him in a way he could not explain, a restlessness that started at dinner and refused to leave him alone until he got in the car and told his driver to take him to the docks. Before the story continues, if you're new to this channel, kindly subscribe to this YouTube channel, like the video, comment, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the conclusion of this story and more intense stories like this. His lieutenant, Park Sung, walked up beside him and lowered his voice. "Boss, we've got a problem with Container 7. Did not look at him. Define problem. It's not product. It's not weapons." Park paused. "It's people." Turned his head slowly. In 15 years of running the most feared criminal organization in Seoul, he had kept one rule above everything else. He did not touch human trafficking. Not because he was sentimental, because it brought a kind of heat that no amount of money was worth. It was messy, it was loud, and it left trails that never disappeared. Anyone in his network who dabbled in it answered to him personally, and they never made the same mistake twice. "How many?" he asked. "We think 4. Maybe 5. Park shifted on his feet. "Boss, the ship's captain is connected to the Jong faction. This might be a test. They might be watching to see how we handle it." "I don't perform for other people's tests," said quietly. He started walking toward Container 7. Park grabbed his arm, which was something he almost never did. "Sir, if we call the authorities, this comes back to us. If we release them on the street, they talk. If we hand them over to the Jong faction, we look weak. There is no clean option here." Looked down at the hand on his arm. Park released it immediately. "Open the container," said. The doors swung open with a heavy groan of metal, and the smell hit him first. Stale air, sweat, something antiseptic and wrong. His men shone their flashlights inside, and saw them. 4 figures huddled against the far wall. 3 young women who looked to be in their early 20s, and 1 girl who was clearly younger, her knees pulled to her chest, her dark eyes catching the flashlight beam and reflecting something that was not just fear. It was fury. Jiho's eyes moved to her without his permission and stayed there. She was maybe 15 or 16, dark-skinned, her hair pulled back roughly, wearing a thin jacket that was completely wrong for the Korean winter. There was a cut above her eyebrow that had dried into a dark line, and her bottom lip was swollen. But she was not crying. The other 3 women were crying softly, clinging to each other. This girl was sitting apart from them, her jaw set, her eyes moving around the space with the careful calculation of someone trying to figure out every possible exit. She reminded him of someone. He could not place it immediately, and the feeling unsettled him. "Get them out," he said. Park stepped close again. "Boss, I strongly advise." "I said get them out." His voice did not rise. It never rose. But something in the temperature of it made Park step back and start issuing orders. The women came out first, unsteady on their feet, blinking against the flashlights. Jiho's men draped coats around them and led them aside. The girl was last. She stood in the doorway of the container and looked down at Jiho from the slight elevation, and for a moment neither of them moved. She was studying him the same way he was studying her, measuring, calculating, deciding. "I'm not going anywhere with strange men," she said. Her Korean was non-existent, but her English was sharp and American accented, each word clipped and certain. One of his younger men stepped forward and she moved back half a step, her hands coming up in a defensive position that told Jiho someone had taught her how to protect herself. Not enough, clearly, given that she had ended up in a shipping container, but enough to tell him she was a fighter. Jiho held up one hand, and his man stopped. He looked at the girl. "Where are you from?" he asked in English. His accent was heavy, but his vocabulary was precise. He had learned English in his 20s for business, and he had never lost the habit. She blinked. She had not expected that. "Chicago," she said after a pause, like she was deciding whether that information could be used against her. "How old are you?" "Old enough." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. He could not remember the last time his mouth had done that involuntarily. "How did you get here?" Her jaw tightened. I was told there was a modeling opportunity. Agency, contracts, flights, the whole thing. My mom just died and I was. She stopped herself. Her chin lifted slightly. It doesn't matter how I got here. What matters is where I'm going. And I'm not going anywhere until I know who you are and what you want. Jiho studied her for a long moment. The fog was thickening around the dock. His men were watching him with barely concealed confusion because Jiho Kang did not stand at cold docks in the middle of the night having conversations with teenage girls. He gave orders and things happened. That was the natural order of things. My name is Jiho, he said. I own this dock. Those men, he gestured toward the ship, were not supposed to be here. Neither were you. He paused. I'm going to take you somewhere warm. You can decide what happens next after that. She stared at him for a long time. The wind cut across the dock and she shivered once, quickly, and hated herself for it. He could see that in the way her expression tightened. If you try anything, she said, I will scream so loud they'll hear me in Japan. Noted, Jiho said. He turned and walked toward his car. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him. Her name was Maya. He found that out on the drive to the safe house, when she sat rigidly in the back seat pressed against the door, as far from him as possible, and answered his careful questions in short, precise sentences like she was being interviewed by the police. Maya Johnson, 16 years old, from the south side of Chicago. Her mother, Diane, had died of cancer 6 months ago. A woman who called herself an agent had reached out through Maya's school, promising a modeling contract in Seoul that would pay enough to cover the debts Diane had left behind. Jiho listened to every word with his eyes forward and his face neutral. But when she said the name Diane, his hands, resting on his thighs, tightened almost imperceptibly. Diane. He had not heard that name spoken out loud in 15 years. The safe house was a clean, quiet apartment on the 14th floor of a building in Mapogu that Jiho owned through 3 different shell companies. It was used occasionally for witnesses, for business associates who needed to disappear temporarily, for situations that required discretion. It had never been used for a 16-year-old girl from Chicago who sat on the edge of the couch, like she was ready to sprint for the door at any moment. Jiho stood by the window and watched the city while one of his female staff, a quiet woman named Mrs. Cho, brought Maya hot soup and a change of clothes. Maya looked at the soup for a long moment, and Jiho could see the exact internal battle playing out on her face. Pride versus hunger. Hunger won. She picked up the spoon and ate with the careful control of someone who had not eaten properly in days but refused to look desperate doing it. The cut on your head needs cleaning, Jiho said without turning from the window. It's fine, Maya said. It's not fine. It will get infected. I've had worse. He turned to look at her then. She said it so matter-of-factly, without self-pity, without any bid for sympathy. Just a simple statement of fact. He believed her completely, and that bothered him more than he expected. Mrs. Cho cleaned the cut while Maya sat still and stared at the wall with the focused expression of someone mentally transporting themselves somewhere else entirely. When it was done, she rolled her shoulders and looked around the apartment properly for the first time, taking inventory the way Jiho himself had been trained to do years ago in very different circumstances. Is this your place? She asked. One of them. How many do you have? Enough. She made a sound that might have been a scoff. So you're rich. Yes. And you're in the Mafia. Jiho looked at her. She looked back at him with complete steadiness, and he realized she had been putting pieces together since the dock. The men, the guns, none of them tried particularly hard to hide, the way everyone moved when he spoke. That's a complicated word, he said. It's a pretty simple word actually, Maya said. 6 letters. Means organized crime. She paused. My mom used to say that dangerous men always think they're more complicated than they are. The mention of her mother landed in the room like something physical. Jiho felt it in his chest before he could stop himself. He turned back to the window. You should sleep, he said. You're safe here tonight. You keep saying safe like it's supposed to mean something coming from you. It means exactly what it means coming from me, he said quietly. No one touches anything of mine. The room was quiet for a moment. I'm not yours, Maya said. Jiho said nothing, but something moved through him when she said it. Something complicated and nameless that he filed away and refused to examine. Not yet. He left her with Mrs. Cho and walked down the hallway to the room he used when he stayed here, which was rarely. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. In his inside jacket pocket was his phone, And on that phone was the number of a contact who could arrange quiet transportation for Maya back to the United States within 48 hours. The sensible thing, the clean thing, the thing that kept his world orderly and predictable, was to make that call right now. He did not make the call. Instead, he sat in the dark and let himself think the thought he had been refusing since the dock. Diane Johnson, American, from Chicago. He had met her 16 years ago when she was in Seoul on a teaching program, and he was 28 years old and still had enough of himself left to fall for someone completely and without strategy. She had been warm and sharp and completely unimpressed by him in a way that no one in his world ever was. They had been together for 8 months. He had been, in whatever limited way he was capable of at the time, happy. And then she was gone. No warning, no fight, no explanation. One morning she was there, and by evening her apartment was empty and her phone was disconnected, and every channel he used to find people came back with nothing. He had looked for 2 years before he accepted that she had simply chosen to disappear from his life, and he was going to have to live with that. He had never understood why. Now he sat in a dark room in Mapogu thinking about a girl with Diane's eyes and Diane's chin and Diane's exact way of lifting her jaw when she refused to let someone see her flinch. Thinking about the age she had given him. 16. Thinking about the timeline that his brain was assembling without his permission, coolly and precisely the way it assembled everything, and arriving at a conclusion that made his lungs feel like they were being compressed from the outside. He pressed his palms flat against his thighs. He needed to be certain. He was not a man who acted on feeling. He was a man who acted on evidence. Whatever this was, whatever he thought it might be, he was not going to let it become anything until he had something in front of him that was undeniable. He picked up his phone and called Park. "I need a favor," he said when Park answered. Quiet. Nothing in writing. Park paused. "What kind of favor?" "I need a DNA comparison run." Discreetly. "Tonight, I need you to get a sample from the girl's hairbrush in the safe house bathroom. Don't let Mrs. Cho see you do it." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Park was smart enough not to ask questions he wasn't supposed to ask. "And the comparison sample? Come to me directly. I'll give it to you myself." Another pause. "Jiho, is everything all right?" It was the first time in years Park had used his name without his title. Jiho stared at the wall. "Get me the results as fast as you can," he said, and hung up. He did not sleep that night. In the morning, he found Maya sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Cho's old laptop open in front of her, her brow furrowed, typing something quickly. She looked up when he came in, and then immediately looked back at the screen with the pointed indifference of someone who had decided not to acknowledge that they had been thinking about him. "There's coffee," Mrs. Cho said from the kitchen doorway. Jiho poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter. Maya was wearing the oversized sweatshirt Mrs. Cho had found for her, and her hair was down now, thick and dark, and she had the cut on her forehead covered with a small bandage. She looked younger and more vulnerable than she had on the dock, but something told him she would not appreciate him noticing that. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to find the agency that brought me here," she said without looking up. "Their website is down, but I found a cached version, and I'm trying to get a name, a real name, not the fake one on the contract." She typed something and clicked and made a frustrated sound. "They're good at covering tracks." "I already have the name," Jiho said. She looked up fast. "What?" "The agency. My people traced it last night. It's a front for a network that operates across 4 countries. The man who runs it is currently being made aware that he made a significant error bringing his operation through my port." Maya stared at him. "What does being made aware mean?" "It means he won't do it again." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I'm giving you." He took a sip of coffee and watched her process this. She wanted to push back. He could see it. But she was also smart enough to understand that some doors were better left closed. "What about the other women from the container?" she asked instead. "Arrangements are being made to return them to their families safely and quietly." Maya looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not fully read. Something shifting behind her eyes that she was not ready to show him yet. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "You don't know me. People like you don't just help strangers." Jiho set his coffee cup down on the counter. "No," he said. "We don't." He walked out of the kitchen before she could ask anything else. The DNA results took 48 hours. 48 hours during which Jiho went about his business with the mechanical precision that had made him what he was, taking meetings, signing off on shipments, handling a territorial dispute with the Zhang faction that required 2 hours of tense negotiation in a private room above a restaurant in Gangnam. He did all of it with his usual cold clarity. And underneath every single moment of it, like a current running below still water, was the thought of Maya sitting in that apartment 14 floors up in Mapogu, taking Mrs. Cho's laptop apart metaphorically and reassembling the situation around her with the focused intelligence of someone twice her age. He visited the safe house both evenings. He told himself it was routine. He told himself it was because she was technically his responsibility until arrangements were finalized. He told himself a great many things that he did not entirely believe. On the first evening, she was quieter than before, sitting by the window watching the city with something unreadable on her face. He brought food from a restaurant he owned in Yongsan, proper food, not the convenience store meals Mrs. Cho had been providing, and set it on the table without comment. Maya looked at the spread and then looked at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. They ate in a silence that was surprisingly not uncomfortable. At some point, Maya picked up her chopsticks, studied them, put them down, and picked up the fork Mrs. Cho had thoughtfully placed beside the bowl. Jiho watched her try the japchae with the careful suspicion of someone who had been told her whole life that she would not like something and was determined to form her own opinion. Her expression shifted when she tasted it. Not dramatically, just a small involuntary softening around her eyes. "It's good," she said, like it annoyed her slightly to admit it. "My mother's recipe," Jiho said without thinking. Maya looked at him with surprise, and he realized it was the first personal thing he had said to her that was not in response to a direct question. He picked up his own chopsticks and said nothing further. But he felt her studying him differently after that, like she was updating a file she had been building on him since the doc. "Tell me about your mother," she said eventually. "No. Tell me about Chicago then. Have you been?" "Once. For business." "What did you think?" "Cold," he said. She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it before she pulled it back. "You're in Seoul in February talking about cold. Seoul cold is dignified," he said. "Chicago cold is personal." This time she did smile, briefly and fully, and it hit him somewhere behind the sternum with a force he was completely unprepared for. Because it was Diane's smile. Exact. The way it started slow and then arrived all at once like it had been trying to stay hidden and simply could not manage it. He looked down at his food and spent a moment making sure his face was doing what he needed it to do. On the second evening, she showed him what she had found. She had used Mrs. Cho's laptop and what Jiho suspected was a level of technical ability that would have impressed his best people to pull together a detailed profile of the trafficking network, cross-referencing cached websites, social media ghost accounts, and financial records she had no business being able to access. She laid it out on the table in front of him with the confidence of someone presenting a report, walking him through each piece methodically, her finger tracing connections on the screen. Jiho looked at it for a long time. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. "My mom taught me some of it," Maya said. There was a tightening in her voice when she mentioned Diane, brief and quickly controlled. She was paranoid about online security. Said knowing how systems worked was the best way to protect yourself from the people who used them against you. She paused. "The rest I just figured out." Jiho studied the screen. Then he studied her. "You could work for me," he said. Maya stared at him. "I'm 16. I'm aware. And you run the Mafia. You keep saying that word. Because it keeps being accurate." She closed the laptop. "I'm going back to Chicago. As soon as you tell me how." "I'm arranging it," he said. "You keep saying that too." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Why is it taking so long? You own a dock. You clearly have resources. Getting one person on a plane to Chicago should take about 4 phone calls." She was right, and they both knew it. Jiho stood. "It will be sorted soon," he said, and left before the conversation could go anywhere further. Park called him at 11 that night. Jiho was in his study at his main residence, a modernist house in Songbuk-dong that was beautiful and quiet and had never once felt like a home. He was sitting behind his desk, not reading the financial report open in front of him, when his phone lit up with Park's name. He looked at it for 3 full rings before he answered. "The results came back," Park said. Jiho said nothing. "Jiho." Park's voice was careful in the way it only got when he was delivering something he did not know how to deliver. "The probability is 99.97%. She's yours." The study was very quiet. Jiho could hear the city distantly outside the window, the low, constant breath of Seoul at night. And he sat inside that sound and felt something he had not felt in so long, he almost did not recognize it. It moved through his chest like a fault line, shifting, slow and deep and irrevocable, rearranging things that had been set in place for 15 years. He had a daughter. He had a daughter, and she had been in a shipping container. He had a daughter, and she had crossed an ocean alone, grieving her mother, chasing a lie, and ended up on his dock like the universe had decided that 15 years of silence was long enough. "Jiho," Park said again. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing yet," Jiho said. His voice was perfectly steady. "Tell no one." "Understood. Are you?" "Good night, Park." He ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. Then he did something he had not done since the night Diane disappeared. He put his head in his hands and sat in the dark for a very long time. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were dry, but something behind them had changed permanently. He opened his desk drawer and took out the only photograph he had kept of Diane. It was small, slightly faded, taken on a day trip to Bukhansan when the leaves were turning. She was laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, completely unguarded. He had looked at this photograph maybe 4 times in 15 years because looking at it cost him something he could not afford to spend. He looked at it now and thought about Maya's smile arriving slow and then all at once. He thought about Diane discovering what he was and running. Not to hurt him. To protect a child she was already carrying from a world that would have swallowed that child whole. He had spent 15 years believing she left because she did not love him enough. The truth was she left because she loved someone else more, someone who did not exist yet, someone who had grown up on the south side of Chicago learning to hack financial records on a laptop and lift her jaw when she refused to show fear. The grief and the guilt arrived together, and he let them. He owed Diane that much. By morning he had made exactly one decision. He was not going to tell Maya yet. Not because he was afraid, though some part of him recognized that he was more afraid of this 16-year-old girl's reaction than he had ever been of a rival with a gun. He was not going to tell her yet because she had already lost her mother, had already been deceived once spectacularly, had already been through more in the last 6 months than most people survived in a lifetime. He was not going to walk into that apartment and drop another earthquake on her before she had solid ground under her feet. He was going to be sure of what he wanted to say before he said it. He was going to be worthy of saying it. He called Mrs. Cho at 7 in the morning. "Make sure she has everything she needs," he said. "Books, food, whatever she asks for. And tell her the travel arrangements are taking a little longer than expected." Mrs. Cho paused. "She's not going to believe that for much longer, sir. She's very sharp." "I know," Jiho said. "Tell her anyway." Maya knew something was wrong on the 3rd day. Not wrong in a dangerous sense, not the sharp animal instinct that had kept her alert since the container, but wrong in a quieter and more confusing way. Wrong like a puzzle where the pieces were all present, but the picture they were making was not the one on the box. She sat by the window that morning with a cup of tea Mrs. Cho had made her and watched the Seoul skyline and thought carefully about everything that did not add up. Jiho visited every day. That was the first thing. Men like him, and she was under no illusions about what he was, did not personally visit safe houses to check on rescued strangers every single day. They delegated. They moved on. She had seen enough of the world in 16 years, growing up where she grew up, losing who she lost, to know that powerful people did not spend their personal time on problems that were already solved. She was supposedly a solved problem. He kept showing up anyway. The second thing was the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. She had caught it twice now, a particular stillness that came over him, like he was trying to memorize something or reconcile something, his eyes carrying a weight that had nothing to do with business or obligation. The first time she caught it, she told herself she was imagining it. The second time she filed it away and said nothing. The third thing was the travel arrangements that were apparently perpetually almost ready. She was not stupid. Getting someone on a plane did not take 4 days. It took 4 phone calls, as she had told him directly, and he had not argued with her because he knew she was right. Something was delaying it deliberately, and that something was him, and she did not know why, and not knowing why things happened was the thing Maya Johnson could tolerate least in the world. She was thinking about all of this when Jiho arrived that afternoon. He came in with the contained energy he always carried, filling whatever room he entered, not through noise or performance, but through a kind of gravitational weight, like the air around him simply organized itself differently. He set a paper bag on the table, the same restaurant in Yongsan. She had noticed he always brought food from the same place, and shrugged off his coat. Still no update on the flights? Maya said before he could speak. Soon, he said. You said that yesterday. And the day before, Mrs. Cho offered helpfully from the kitchen, and Jiho gave the doorway a look that made the older woman suddenly find something urgent to attend to in the other room. Maya watched this exchange and felt the corner of her mouth pull slightly despite herself. She straightened it out immediately. I want a real answer, she said. Not soon. Not being arranged. A real one. Jiho sat down across from her, which was something he did not usually do. Usually he stood, kept himself at a slight distance, maintained the space between them like it was a deliberate policy. Today he sat and put his hands flat on the table and looked at her directly. There are some complications, he said. What kind of complications? The kind I'm not ready to explain yet. Maya stared at him. That is genuinely the least reassuring thing you could have said. I know. Are you in danger? Am I in danger? No. Then what? Maya. He said her name, and something about the way he said it, quiet and careful, and carrying something underneath it she could not identify, made her stop. He held her gaze. I need you to trust me for a little longer. I know I haven't given you many reasons to do that. I know what I am and I know what that means to you. But I need a little more time. The room was very quiet. Maya looked at him for a long moment, reading his face the way her mother had taught her to read faces, looking past the surface expression to the muscle tension underneath, to the eyes, to the small involuntary signals that people gave away when they were saying one thing and carrying another. What she found in Jiho's face was not deception exactly. It was more like the expression of someone standing at the edge of something enormous, looking down, trying to find the courage to step forward. She did not know what to do with that. Fine, she said finally. A little longer. Something moved through his expression briefly, too fast to name. He nodded once and reached for the food bag. They ate together again. Maya asked him about Seoul, partly because she was genuinely curious and partly because asking questions was how she managed situations she did not fully understand. He answered more than she expected, telling her about the Han River at night, about the street food in Gwangjang Market, about the way the city looked different depending on which hill you stood on. He spoke about it without sentimentality, but with the particular intimacy of someone who had belonged to a place so long that the place had become part of their architecture. Did you grow up here? She asked. In Dobonggu. North of here. Very different from this. He gestured vaguely at the clean modern apartment around them. Different how? He was quiet for a moment. Smaller. Louder. My mother worked 3 jobs. My father was not a consistent presence. He said the last part with the flat neutrality of someone who had processed an old wound so thoroughly that it no longer bled, only left a smooth scar. I decided when I was very young that I would never be powerless again. Maya absorbed this. Is that why you got into? She paused, searching for a word that was not the one she kept using. All of this. Partly, he said. Power looks different when you grow up without it. My mom used to say that people who chase power are usually running from something, Maya said. She was not trying to be cutting. It came out softer than she intended. Jiho looked at her. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was the smartest person I ever knew, Maya said quietly. Her fingers tightened slightly around her fork. She was also the most careful, like she was always preparing me for something, teaching me things that I thought were random at the time, but now I wonder if they were all connected. Self-defense, how to track people online, how to read documents properly, how to disappear if I needed to. She paused. I used to tease her about it, called her paranoid. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, and she pressed her lips together. Jiho was very still across the table. She sounds like someone who loved you completely, he said. His voice was lower than usual. Maya looked up, and something in his expression caught her off guard. It was not pity. She would have hated pity. It was something rawer than that, something that looked almost like grief, and it confused her enough that she looked back down at her plate. She did, Maya said. She really did. They finished the meal in a quiet that felt different from the silences before. Heavier somehow, and more honest. When Jiho stood to leave, Maya walked him to the door, which she had not done before, and he paused in the doorway and looked at her with that same searching quality she had noticed before. Tomorrow, he said. I'll have answers for you tomorrow. Maya searched his face. Answers about the flights? He held her gaze. Answers about everything. He left before she could respond, and Maya stood in the closed doorway for a long moment with her hand still on the handle, her heart doing something strange and irregular in her chest that she could not explain and was not sure she wanted to. She went to her room and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. Her mother had been to Seoul. She knew that. Diane had mentioned it exactly once, casually, years ago, when Maya was maybe 10 and had found an old photograph tucked inside a book. Seoul had come up and Diane had said, yes, she had spent some time there when she was young on a teaching program, and then moved on quickly in the way she always moved on quickly from anything that touched the years before Maya was born. Maya had not thought about it again until now. Now she thought about it very hard. She reached for the small zippered pocket inside her bag and took out the locket she always kept there, the one her mother had pressed into her hand in the hospital 3 days before she died, the one Diane had worn every day for as long as Maya could remember. Maya had never opened it in front of anyone. She opened it now. On one side was a tiny photograph of Maya at about 2 years old, laughing. On the other side was a photograph of a man. Maya had looked at this photograph 100 times and told herself she did not recognize him because she did not want to recognize him, because recognizing him would mean something she was not ready for. She looked at it now in the quiet of the safe house bedroom, in Seoul, in a building owned by Kang, and she stopped lying to herself. She knew exactly who it was. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark with the locket closed in her fist and her mind moving at a speed that made rest impossible, assembling and reassembling everything she had collected since the dock into a picture that was becoming impossible to deny. The age Jiho would have been 16 years ago. The way he looked at her. The grief in his voice when he talked about her mother. A grief he had no logical reason to carry for a stranger's dead parent, unless she was not a stranger's parent at all. The careful way he had been delaying her departure, not out of malice, but out of something that looked, when she was honest with herself, like a man trying to find the courage to say something that would change everything. Her mother had been in Seoul. Her mother had never spoken about her father beyond saying once, quietly, when Maya was 12 and pushed hard enough, that he was someone she had loved very much, and leaving him was the hardest thing she had ever done, and that was all she was ever going to say about it. Maya had been angry about that for years, had carried a low, burning resentment toward a faceless man who had apparently not been worth keeping in their lives, had constructed in her imagination a person who was careless or cruel or simply indifferent, someone easy to dismiss. She had never once imagined this. She was still lying there when the sun came up and painted the Seoul skyline in pale gold through the window. She heard Mrs. Cho moving quietly in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the morning routine that had become strangely comforting over the past days. Maya got up, washed her face, looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time like she was searching for something in her own reflection, and then went to the kitchen. Mrs. Cho looked up and immediately looked more carefully. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I'm fine," Maya said. Mrs. Cho set a cup of tea in front of her without comment, which Maya was grateful for. Jiho arrived at 10 in the morning, earlier than usual. He was wearing a dark gray shirt instead of his usual jacket, and he looked like he had not slept either, the skin beneath his eyes carrying a faint shadow that his composure could not entirely conceal. He came into the living room and stopped when he saw Maya sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around her teacup and the locket sitting open on the table in front of her. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Maya had ever heard. Jiho looked at the locket. Then he looked at her. His face did not collapse. He was not a man whose face collapsed, but something behind it shifted seismically, and she saw it because she had been studying him long enough to know what to look for. "Sit down," Maya said. Her voice was steady. She had decided in the sleepless dark that she was not going to fall apart. She was going to handle this the way her mother had taught her to handle everything, by looking at it directly and speaking clearly and not letting the size of it knock her off her feet. Jiho sat down across from her. He looked at the photograph in the locket for a moment longer and then raised his eyes to her face. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I suspected since day 2, Maya said. "I knew for certain last night." He exhaled slowly. Something in his posture changed, not collapsing but releasing, like a tension he had been holding for a very long time was being carefully set down. "I was going to tell you today," he said. "I know," Maya said. "I could see you working up to it." He looked at her with something she was starting to recognize as the particular expression he got when she surprised him. It happened more than he probably wanted it to. You could see that. You're not as hard to read as you think you are, she said. Not to me anyway. She paused and then added more quietly. Maybe that means something. I don't know. Jiho looked down at his hands on the table. Strong hands, careful hands. Hands that had done things she probably did not want to know about, and yet had also pulled her out of a shipping container and brought her japchae from a restaurant in Yongsan and sat across from her in the dark and listened to her talk about her mother with an expression that now made devastating sense. I didn't know about you, he said. I need you to know that first. Before anything else. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know you existed. If I had, he stopped. His jaw tightened. I would have found a way. She left to protect me, Maya said. It was not a question. She had worked that out in the dark too. Yes. The word came out rough. She knew what my life was. She made a choice that I understand now even though it cost me. He stopped again. Pressed his lips together. It cost me a great deal. Maya looked at him. It cost me too, she said. Growing up without a father. Wondering. Making up stories about who you were and why you weren't there. She kept her voice even, but her fingers tightened around the teacup. I used to think you just didn't want us. Jiho flinched. It was small and quickly controlled, but she saw it. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, Maya agreed. It doesn't. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning, indifferent and enormous. And in the small, bright space of the safe house apartment, a father and daughter sat across a table from each other for the first time and tried to figure out what language to speak. I have so many questions, Maya said. I'll answer all of them, Jiho said. Every single one. For as long as it takes. Maya looked at him. That could take a very long time. I'm aware. I'm not forgiving you immediately, she said. I'm not forgiving her either, even though she's gone and I know she did what she thought was right. I'm allowed to be angry about the years. You're allowed to be angry about everything, Jiho said. I won't ask you for anything you're not ready to give. Maya was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the locket, at the small photograph of a younger version of the man sitting across from her, and thought about her mother pressing it into her hand in that hospital room. Had Diane known somehow that Maya would end up here? Had she planned it, left breadcrumbs, arranged things in ways that were too subtle to see until you were standing inside them? It was the kind of thing Diane would have done, quietly and completely, and without telling anyone. Maya closed the locket. I want to know about her, she said. When you knew her, what she was like before she was my mom. She never talked about that version of herself, and I always wanted to know. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. Can you do that? Can you tell me about her? Something broke open in Jiho's expression, gently and irrevocably. And for a moment, he looked less like one of Seoul's most feared men and more like someone who had been carrying a photograph in his memory for 15 years and had just been given permission to take it out. Yes, he said. I can do that. He began to talk. He told her about meeting Diane at a rooftop gathering in Itaewon in the autumn, how she had argued with him about something within the first 10 minutes of meeting him and had been entirely unimpressed by the fact that everyone else in the room was afraid of him. He told her about the day trips they took on weekends when he was pretending to be a simpler man than he was, Bukhansan and Namsan, and the long walk along the Han River that Diane always wanted to take further than his patience usually allowed. He told her about Diane's laugh, how it arrived like a surprise even when she was the one laughing, and Maya made a small involuntary sound because she recognized the laugh exactly. He told her about the morning he woke up and she was gone, and the 2 years he spent looking, and the long, slow process of learning to live inside a life that had a permanent absence shaped into it. Maya listened to all of it without interruption, her tea going cold in front of her, her eyes moving between his face and the middle distance as she assembled a version of her mother she had never had access to before, young and free and unguarded, a woman before she became the careful and deliberate person Maya had grown up with. When he finished, they sat in silence for a while. She kept your photograph, Maya said finally. Every single day for 16 years, she wore that locket. I thought it was just a picture of her. I didn't look properly until she stopped. Swallowed. She never stopped. Jiho said nothing, but his eyes were very bright, and he looked at a point just past Maya's shoulder for a moment in the way of someone managing something privately. They were still sitting there an hour later when Park called. Jiho answered, listened for 4 seconds, and his entire face changed. Maya sat up straight. What? Jiho was already standing, his voice dropping into the clipped, rapid Korean he used with his men, his hand up in the gesture that meant wait. Maya watched his face and felt the cold, familiar prickle of danger moving up her spine. He ended the call and looked at her. "We need to move," he said. "Now." "What's happening?" "Someone in my organization talked." His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something she had not heard from him before, a low, vibrating fury that was far more frightening than shouting would have been. "The Zhang faction knows you're here. They know I've been coming here every day. They know I have an attachment to you, and they intend to use it." Maya was already on her feet. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," he said. "Maybe less." He crossed to her in 3 steps and looked at her with an intensity that was new and different from anything before, because it was not the look of a man protecting an obligation. It was the look of a man who had just found something irreplaceable and was not going to lose it. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do exactly what I say." "Can you do that?" Maya looked up at him. In another life, in a normal life, this was the moment a father might grab his daughter's hand on the way to school, or steady her on a bicycle, or sit in the front row of an auditorium. Instead, they were standing in a safe house in Mapogu with armed men on their way, and the entire city indifferent outside the window. It was not the reunion either of them would have chosen, but it was theirs. "Yes," she said. "Let's go." They moved. The next 2 hours were the longest of Maya's life, and the most clarifying. Jiho moved through the building and the city with a precision and authority that under any other circumstances she might have found frightening, but right now was the most reassuring thing she had ever witnessed. He kept her close without crowding her, communicated in short, clear sentences, made decisions instantly and without second-guessing, and twice put himself physically between her and directions from which threats could have come. The Zhang faction caught up with them in a parking structure in Mapo, for men who had clearly expected to find one frightened girl and instead found Jiho Kang in a state of focused and absolute intent. The confrontation was brief and decisive, and Maya pressed herself against the concrete pillar she had been told to stand behind and kept her eyes open because her mother had always told her that closing your eyes was never going to make anything safer. When it was over, Jiho came back to her and looked her over quickly from head to foot with the systematic thoroughness of someone checking inventory he could not afford to lose. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. "Are you?" He looked mildly surprised that she asked. "No." "Good," Maya said. Her voice was remarkably steady for someone whose heart was attempting to exit her chest. "Can we please sit down somewhere?" "Yes," Jiho said. "We can do that." They ended up in the back of his car in the gray Seoul afternoon, the city moving past the windows, both of them quiet and slightly undone in ways they were managing privately. After a while, Maya became aware that she had moved slightly closer to him on the seat without deciding to, and he had not moved away. She thought about her mother, about all the years of careful preparation, all the lessons that had seemed random and now seemed like a map. She thought about a locket worn every day for 16 years. She thought about ending up on this exact dock in this exact city and what the odds of that were if the universe was simply indifferent. "I'm not calling you Dad," she said into the quiet. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time." "I'm not asking you to," Jiho said. "But I'm not getting on a plane tomorrow either," she said. "There are things I want to know. About her. About you. About all of it." She paused. "And I think you owe me the time to find out." Jiho looked at her. Outside the window, Seoul slid past in the late afternoon light, vast and complicated and entirely indifferent to the 2 people sitting in the back of one car, trying to build something out of 15 years of absence, and one shipping container and a photograph worn close to a dead woman's heart. "I owe you a great deal more than time," he said quietly. Maya looked out the window. "Then we'll start there," she said. To enjoy more stories, kindly subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, comment, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more intense stories like this.